The head of a private U.S. military group which trains Ukrainian soldiers has slammed the country as corrupt while confirming that Ukrainian fighters commit atrocities by killing Russian prisoners of war. RT's Igor Shtanov dives into the story.
The Mozart Group, an American private security company that proudly markets itself as a veteran military force providing training to Ukrainian soldiers inside the country. It was founded by retired U.S. Marine Colonel Andrew Milburn, who's been repeatedly put on a pedestal for helping out Kiev in this time of need. Yet, as it turns out, he is very, very far from a fan of Ukraine.
It's a corrupt, up society. So I'm not a big fan of Ukraine. It's not about Ukraine. We're not like, I happen to have, Ukraine flag tied to my bag, but I'm not, oh my God, Ukraine's so awesome. No, because I understand that there are plenty of people running Ukraine. It's not about that. It's about global norms, right?
Right.
It's about Putin.
Well, Milburn didn't mince his words there. But apparently there's a lot that the Mozart Group is morally prepared to forgive and forget.
The Ukrainians are in violation of the Hague Convention. They're filming of a number of things that they're doing with POWs is violating law of armed conflict. You shouldn't kill dudes who, everyone knows who surrendered. And there was plenty of that.
All this is something you wouldn't expect to hear from the same person who publicly glorified the war in Ukraine as just. And it's far from the first contradictory statement from Milburn. In fact, his accounts of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine have been all over the place. In one CNN interview, for instance, the former colonel is unequivocal. All foreign weapons sent to Ukraine are accounted for.
I would say that the very last concern that the United States government should have right now is that these arms end up in the wrong hands.
And it's almost like his evil twin then appears on CBS with a statement that sounds the polar opposite.
I can tell you unarguably that on the frontline units, these things are not getting there, all right? Drones, switchblades, IFACs, they're not, all right? Body armor, helmets, you name it.
Is it safe to characterize this as a little bit of a black hole?
I suppose if you don't have visibility of where this stuff is going, and if you're asking that question, then it would appear that it's a black hole, yeah.
Now, Kiev, of course, wasn't impressed by the reporting and somehow managed to bully CBS to retract and take down the piece. But there have been repeated concerns over Western arms ending up on the global weapons black market. This unverified footage, for instance, purports to show US and European-made rocket launchers meant for Ukraine ending up in Syria. All this comes as no surprise to anyone who's been following events in Ukraine long enough over the years. Neo-Nazi groups like the Azov Battalion that used to be reputationally toxic and officially banned from receiving Western weapons have now been rebranded as heroes. Ukraine's own image has been polluted so badly by rampant corruption for years. But this year, Kiev somehow got the power to censor any Western media outlet who dares to bring this up. But as long as this can be weaponized to hurt Russia, Kiev will continue to have its carte blanche.
The contrast with his portrayal in mainstream publications like the New York Times, which wrote a puff piece about retired Colonel Andy Milburn. He's kind of a famous figure in Marine circles, and now he's running one of the biggest mercenary companies in Ukraine, the Mozart Group. But then here you have him on this military groupie podcast called Team House. Like after an hour, his speech starts to slur, and then he really starts to lift the mask and says it's not really about Ukraine for him. Ukraine is a screwed up society in so many terms. It's run by, in his words, sick people, and the soldiers are rampantly committing atrocities. Actually, one of the hosts tries to walk back the term atrocities, and he corrects him and says, no, these are atrocities, and they are being committed there. So it was a very candid session drinking session with Colonel Andy Milburn, providing a view of Ukrainian society that he had a front seat to, having trained so many soldiers, and that U.S. media still refuses to tell Americans about. As the host of Team House said, we can't actually start abandoning our Ukrainian partners at this point, even though in the U.S. military, he claimed that you would be done if you filmed POWs on camera being shot and summarily executed, as we've seen from Ukraine. But I don't think this will have any repercussions for the war effort as a whole, because this is what the $45 billion already allocated for 2023 by Congress, which just clapped like seals for Zelensky, is paying for. It's paying for these atrocities, this unprofessionalism, and the U.S. military intelligence apparatus is willing to go along with that as long as they get results. What are the results they want? It's what Milburn and his buddies in the man cave said they were: weakening Putin and destabilizing Russia.
And Africa is another region suffering from the unwanted repercussions of the Ukrainian crisis, as weapons initially designated for Kiev end up in the hands of local terrorist groups. The Nigerian president has blamed the conflict in Ukraine for crippling his country's security.
Regrettably, the situation in the Sahel and the raging war in Ukraine serve as major sources of weapons and fighters that bolster the ranks of the terrorists in Lake Chad region. Weapons being used for the war in Ukraine and Russia are equally beginning to filter to the region.
A former peacekeeper in Sudan and Mali says the West is responsible for the instability in Africa due to its ongoing support of Ukraine.
The West is only risking its future. They realize now that everything is more or less lost, but they don't really want to lose face. The West thinks it can always restore its image, but I don't think that's the case at all. They are not in the best position right now. If you look at all these terrorists, a lot of weapons were acquired by them with the help of the West. In Libya, for instance, it was the West that caused everything, and then Libya essentially fell. The Sahel region of Africa is now in chaos. These are all the games of the West, in my opinion.